So sometimes, especially on BookTube, it feels like there is a great divide between those that read young adult and those that read adult literature. I personally love both. I probably read more adult literature, but I do love a bit of young adult, and I get a lot of questions as well from people wanting to diverge from the young adult genre that are a bit intimidated and don't know where to start. So I thought I might start doing a little series in which I recommend to you an adult book based on a young adult book. And obviously, if you usually read adult books or have read the adult books in this collection, you can also take this the other way round and maybe go off and try the young adult book I've recommended. But I've decided to start with 4 books for my first video, and then if you enjoy this video, let me know and I can do more of them in the future. So let us begin. The first book I have is a book I actually recently reviewed, and it's Only Ever Yours by Louise O'Neill. This is a young adult dystopian novel set in a world where women have a very specific role and are raised basically to serve men in different functions, and are raised in a very, very superficial environment where it's all about competing for who's the prettiest and who's the thinnest and all of these kind of themes. Personally, I think this is a phenomenal book regardless of who its age demographic is, and I think everyone should read it, no matter what age you are, as long as you're prepared to be a little bit depressed, a little bit disturbed, and are able to deal with the kind of topics it deals with. But I will link my review down below if you want to know more. An adult book I want to recommend on the basis of this is an adult book that has been compared to this quite a lot, and it is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. This book is also a dystopian novel set in a world where the roles between men and women have become ever increasingly divided. There is problems with fertility, which, unlike in this book where it's basically women have stopped being born, people are just finding it very difficult to conceive, and only a few women are left fertile, so they are almost like loaned out to couples, rich couples, who will then try to impregnate the women, the handmaid, and then raise the child, and she's then passed on to another home. Although the dystopian worlds are quite different, they deal with very similar themes, including gender, sexism, fertility, dystopian worlds. They're also similar in that they're both told from the perspective of a woman who is involved in this world, is just basically trying to get along and is not necessarily out to save this dystopian world and rearrange the way everything is structured. So I think they have a similar perspective in that sense, and I loved both of these books. So again, we just highly recommend both of these books, and maybe if you've read one, you might want to read the other. The next young adult book I want to mention is one that I don't have a physical copy of with me, so I'll put a picture here, and that is Eragon, the first in the inheritance cycle by Christopher Paolini. It does seem to usually get categorised into the young adult section. It does follow a teenager as the main character. This is a high fantasy series set in a very magical world full of loads of different kind of magical beings, including elves, dwarves, humans, and most importantly, dragons. This is one hell of a dragon series, and if you love dragons, then you'll probably love this series or already have loved it. Although it begins purely following our main character Eragon, who finds a dragon egg at the beginning of the story, and it does later go on to cover more than just Eragon's story. We follow some other characters as the story unfolds throughout the other books, and there's so many books I could recommend on the basis of this. You should probably read Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones, but the one I'm going to pick specifically because it specifically deals with dragons in a high fantasy world with multiple characters of various sexes, which I think is important because Eragon isn't just about men, which Lord of the Rings kind of is, and that is Robin Hobb's Dragon Keeper, which is from the Rainworld Chronicles, being the first in the series. And like I said, this is an adult high fantasy series where dragons play a very significant role in the plot. Not just evil creatures like in, say, The Hobbit, they have personalities and they interact with the other characters who have to establish relationships with them. It follows the perspective of multiple characters, an adventure saga, it's a fantasy book, and it just gave me very similar feelings, and I adored both series, and they both actually have 4 books. I don't know if that means anything. Yeah, I think if you enjoyed the Inheritance Cycle, you'll enjoy the Rainworld Chronicles and vice versa. Now moving on to a bit of a contemporary set in the real world this time, and that is We Were Liars by E. Lockhart. Now this book took over booktube for a while, and it is a really good book. I can understand why it was so popular. It follows a group of rich teenagers who summer every year on this private island that their families own, and they're a group of friends with somewhat of a dysfunctional relationship, as the title implies, but it is most importantly a mystery. And something happens one summer on this island and we aren't aware of what it is, and basically the rest of the story is unfolding to discover what happened that summer. I have a review of this and I'll link that down below. I have a review of a lot of these books, so I'll link all of them down below. The book I want to recommend on behalf of this for a more adult read, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Now, there's definitely some major differences in this, but there's also some major similarities. It follows a group of predominantly rich young people in their group of friends. In this case, they are in college and they all study ancient Greek and Latin together. They have somewhat dysfunctional relationship and live in this kind of secretive, cliquey group, much like the characters in this. This book is also full of mystery and kind of disaster, very similar themes, and I think there's similarities in the characters, although this one I would say is a bit more of a fast-paced mystery, whereas this one's a bit more of an intense mess with your mind kind of read that takes a bit longer to get through. But I do think that people that liked one might like the other, so it's worth checking out. Last but certainly not least for this video, I'm going to recommend a book based on Vivian versus the Apocalypse by Katie Coyle. And unsurprisingly, this is an apocalyptic YA novel, you can tell from the title. I haven't read an incredible amount of apocalyptic fiction, but I have really enjoyed what I have read, and this being one of them. Really enjoyed this. It follows our main character Vivian, who has to get on in a new world where the apocalypse has very recently occurred and a big chunk of the population has disappeared, apparently in some sort of religious rapture. They don't know what's happened, they don't know how to survive, and they kind of just have to make their way, and I really like Vivian as a character. So the story I'm going to recommend instead of that is one of the most important books probably in apocalyptic fiction, and a lot of you will probably have heard of it, and it's The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham, which again is a book which, like Vivian versus the Apocalypse, starts at the very beginning of the apocalypse, and our main character doesn't know what has happened. He's one of the strange people who the apocalypse hasn't affected in the same way as most people, and he just wants to know what's going on, he wants to survive, and it's about his journey building new relationships in this apocalyptic world. Just trying to get on with things. I think another similarity about these two books is they're very isolated in their experiences. So this one's set in England, and you know very little about what's going on outside of Britain in this apocalyptic world, because it's told from the perspective of our main character, who knows very little, whereas this one's set in America and you know very little about what's happening outside of America in this apocalyptic world, because it's told from the perspective of our main character who's in America. I think they overlap again in that way. But obviously I cannot guarantee that you will like these books if you like the books I showed them alongside, but they are worth trying, and I hope you enjoyed this video. If you liked it, then let me know and I can do more of these. But until next time guys, happy reading, and I'll see you all again soon. Bye! And something happens